Hey there guys, Alex here, back again today for another video. I hope everybody in the VC is doing well, and I hope everybody's looking forward to Christmas. Obviously we've only got a couple of days to go now, and I guess at last I'm starting to feel slightly Christmassy. It hasn't really felt like, the normal build up to Christmas, I guess, in terms of festivities for me. But yeah, it's finally kind of set in today that Christmas is just around the corner, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Christmas has always been one of my favourite times of year. Obviously, it gives me the chance to come home from university and see my family, which I've done now. Came home a few days ago, and yeah, just come home, see the family, wind down, I guess, because it's been a very stressful and busy few months for me, and Christmas is just the kind of respite that I need at the moment. And yeah, it's just a magical time of year for a lot of people. So I'm looking forward to the actual day, and really kind of getting into the spirit now, I guess. And yeah, I wanted to make a video today, and I was thinking about putting this off maybe for a week or so because maybe it would have been better to do it just before New Year, to kind of fully wrap up the whole year as opposed to before Christmas. But yeah, I thought, considering I'm not really listening to any new music at the moment, I'm not really listening to new albums. I thought I might as well do my top 10 albums of 2013 list. So I'm just going to count down my 10 favorite albums of the year, and yeah, it's something that I did last year, and actually did a top 20 on my blog for last year, and I'm in the process of writing a top 25 list for my blog this year. So that should be up over the next couple of days. But for the purposes of not making an hour-long video, which I'm sure none of you want to see, I just kind of had to narrow it down to 10, and it was very tough because this year's been, amazing, very, very good year for music, as was last year. I think this year, definitely came close. There were some amazing releases, maybe not in terms of the top three or four, maybe these weren't quite as good as my top 4 or 5 last year. But in general, I've just heard a ton of good music this year, and wanted to pay tribute to some of those albums in a top 10 list. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do today. Going to count down from 10 to 1. Before I do that, I'm going to give some notable mentions to some albums which I enjoyed this year and could have easily made the list in different years, but didn't quite make the cut this year, but they're still amazing, very, very solid releases. So the first of the notable mentions is an album by an artist called MIA, and she put out an album this year called Matangi. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And yeah, she's a kind of mixture of things. She's a songwriter, an electronic producer. She raps occasionally, and in fact, this record was quite, rap laden, I guess. A lot of hip hop on there. And I think she's English and Sri Lankan. She comes from, I think she might have lived in Sri Lanka when she was younger and emigrated to England. And she put out this amazing record this year called Matangi, which definitely displayed some of my favourite production work of the year. Some really loud, danceable beats and flows from MIA, and just really enjoyed this release from start to finish. It's very, very catchy and got stuck in my head. Ended up playing this a whole bunch of times. So MIA is the first one. Second of all, Vampire Weekend, Modern Vampires of the City. I would have loved to included this album on the top 10 list, and it almost got on there, but not quite, overshadowed by some things. But yeah, Modern Vampires of the City is by far my favourite Vampire Weekend album to date. Just really enjoyed, some of the lyrical concepts they came up with on that album. I love getting the vinyl version with the white vinyl. I love the artwork. I love pretty much everything about this record, apart from maybe a couple of tracks that maybe disappointed me a tiny bit. But in general, I think Vampire Weekend is heading in a direction that I can definitely get on board with, and really enjoyed that record this year. So that's the second notable mention. Third of all, we have Death Grips. Obviously, they were my number one They had the #1 spot last year with the Money Store. But this year they came out with a very spontaneous release. Not many people really knew about it. In fact, nobody knew about it until they put it out. It was just kind of out of the blue, and it's something that Death Grips, tend to do. They like to surprise and do things very off the cuff, I guess. And they put out their album Government Plates again about a month ago, and I really enjoyed this. I listened to it so many times that maybe I overplayed it and didn't get as much out of it as I might have done if I'd taken my time a bit more with it. But again, a very solid release from Death Grips, very glitchy, again very abrasive, but maybe not quite as pummeling and aggressive as some of their previous work. But again, I really enjoyed it, and I think Death Grips have still got a long way to go. I think they can release, even better records than the Money Store, even though that would be a very, very difficult task. I think they do definitely have the capacity to do that. So I can't wait to see where they go next, but they didn't quite make the top 10 this year with Government Plates. So getting into the top 10 now, at number 10, we have probably the most controversial album of the year, and definitely one of the most talked about albums of the year. This guy never fails to kind of stir up controversy, stir up debate and conversation, and everybody has their own opinion on this guy, but I'm a fan, and I've liked his music for a while now. So at number 10, we have Kanye West and his album, of course, Yeezus, which came out about halfway through the year, June, July time, sometime around then. And yeah, as I say, this guy, he never fails to spark up fierce debates about his personality, his arrogance, his cockiness, and admittedly, I have fallen victim to what people think about him and the kind of common perception of Kanye West. But I try and see past that, even when I'm watching his interviews where not a lot of what he says makes sense. I try to kind of get on board and decode what he's saying to a certain extent. But yeah, his album Yeezus was, definitely a head turner this year. Everybody has their own opinion on it. And a lot of people saw it as a very arrogant and, cocky statement to say that, he was a god and comparing himself to Jesus and all this stuff. I didn't really look at this album from that standpoint. I was much more looking at it from a kind of musical and lyrical standpoint. And I think to a certain extent, Kanye delivered on this. I wish that he'd stayed in the studio and kind of refined this a bit more, taken a bit more time to perfect it. I think it could have been a top 5 album if he'd done that. As it stands, I applaud Kanye for kind of bringing this noise hop, Death Grips inspired sound and taking it into the mainstream. I think it definitely takes guts to do that, and I don't think anybody's really done it up until Yeezus. I think he was the most successful person to do that. And in spots, I think he shows real promise with Yeezus, and I love probably over half the songs on the album. There are definitely spots where I think that he could have definitely developed it lyrically, and even kind of experimentally and production wise, he could have worked a bit harder on some of his beats and his flows on this. But in general, I really enjoyed it, and I know everybody has their own opinion. Some people love it, some people hate it, but I definitely love this. So yeah, Yeezus is number 10. Number 9, we have Foxygen and their album We Are the 21st Century Ambassadors of Peace and Magic, which is a bit of a mouthful. But yeah, these guys, I'm not sure where they're from in the States, but they're kind of a psych folk band, and they've put out a number of EPs over the last few years, and people have really enjoyed what they've been putting out, and this was their first attempt at putting out a full album, even though it was only, I think, just over 30 minutes, so it wasn't a very long album, and that was one of the downsides, I guess, of this project. But in general, I really enjoyed what Foxygen did on this album. Some really catchy tunes, some great lyrics and melodies, and just a really enjoyable listen. Again, I played it a bunch of times and really tried to understand each and every song for what it was, and I think they did a good job. I think, again, they've got progression. I think they can go further with this sound, with this style, But I think in general they've done a good job in putting together a decent album with We Are the 21st Century, Ambassadors of Peace and Magic. But they can definitely go further, but they're at number 9 on this list. At number 8, we have a outfit which a lot of people might not be too familiar with, but I really enjoyed this album. Came out quite early in the year, and it's Clipping's Mid-City, which, again, very kind of Death Grips inspired. They took a lot of noise hop influence and really fleshed it out. There's some really aggressive, abrasive beats on here, some of the most abrasive beats and kind of production that you're going to find on any record this year. And above the production, which is often quite overwhelming and hard to look past, they also had some amazing verses on here. You know, the rapping was top notch on most of the tracks. There were definitely some weaker points, but I think on the majority of the tracks, you know, the verses and the lyrics were pretty amazing. And I think, you know, they put out definitely one of my favorite hip hop albums of the year. So yeah, Clipping is number 8 with Mid-City. Number 7, we have Kurt Vile, Waking on a Pretty Daze, which I showed the record of quite a few months back. Again, this was an album that I kind of fell in love with from the first listen. I really enjoyed listening to this over and over again. There weren't really any tracks apart from the first track that really blew me away, and that's the reason that it's not further up on the list, but it's just a really, really solid album from Kurt Vile. You know, I think he really delivered in 2011 with Smoke Ring for My Halo, which was one of my favourites from that year. But I knew that he had further to go with it, and I think with Waking on a Pretty Daze, he kind of fleshes out these psych, you know, kind of ambient sounds, and really produces an atmosphere unlike anything else I've heard this year. So I really enjoyed the kind of solidness and also the kind of dreaminess of this album. It really did, you know, it really did work for me. So Kurt Vile with Waking on a Pretty Daze at number 7. Number 6, we have a release from an artist which I amazingly hadn't actually heard before this year. I was a newbie to this band before listening to this, but this album really impressed me and actually really blew me away on the first few listens. And the album is Arcade Fire, Reflector, which again was very hyped up like Kanye's album. Obviously Arcade Fire were coming off The Suburbs, which I think was released in 2010, which a lot of people kind of swear by as being one of their favourites from that year. And Reflector, they kind of go on a different journey, I guess. They go in a different direction, and you know, it's very experimental in parts. You know, especially the first song, you know, a huge progression in that song, kind of moving from a slower beat and lyrical pattern to something very upbeat and energetic and alive, I guess. And that's what I loved about it, especially when I heard that first song when it came out. And I was just so hyped for the record. I couldn't wait to hear what it would sound like. And ended up getting the record or listening to the record through. They originally played it, streamed it on YouTube and played it over this film, I think from the 60s or 70s. Might have even been the 50s, I'm not too sure. And the film was really a great accompaniment to this music, and it kind of took me on a journey. It was a great way of kind of putting this music across to me. So yeah, I really enjoyed Reflector. There's, again, a handful of tracks on there which I really, really love. There are some slightly weaker ones on there, which kind of, you know, is the reason why it's at number 6 and not higher. But, you know, there are some great, great songs on here. And I think, you know, a lot of people in the VC could definitely vibe with a lot of what Arcade Fire is doing on Reflector. So that's number 6. Number 5, we have Danny Brown and his album Old. Obviously, Danny Brown is a hip-hop artist, and yeah, really enjoyed his album this year. It was kind of an album of two halves. He had, you know, he described it in interviews, and he talks about it a bit. You know, the first half was supposed to be, you know, kind of harking back to his earlier days in hip-hop, kind of bringing back his old style. Instead of what he was doing on Triple X, he was going back beyond that to earlier times, and kind of, it was a much more raw, sound, and much more lyric centered instead of production centered. And yeah, that was the first side. And then on the second side, he progressed and kind of contrasted the first side with some really heavy dance tracks, some kind of club bangers, I guess, and focusing much more on the production rather than the lyrics, I guess. And yeah, I just really enjoyed Old from start to finish, and that's why it's a number 5. At number 4 on the list, we have Julia Holter and her album Loud City Song. Definitely my favourite female singer-songwriter album of the year. I liked Laura Marling's Once I Was an Eagle, which came out slightly earlier. And, that impressed me. But when I heard Julia Holter, when I heard her put out this record and, listened to it through from start to finish, it just completely blew me away. It's so ambient, so atmospheric, and, really a deeply emotional listen for me. And just found myself playing this and kind of being entranced by it over and over again. And, I just became such a fan of Julia Holter as, a lyricist, as a producer, as a vocalist. I mean, her vocals are just stunning on this record. And I think she's really come of age, I guess, and finally put out a record which, she can really be proud of. So yeah, number 4 is Loud City Song. If you haven't heard this record, I think a lot of people in the VC could definitely appreciate this stuff. So go and check it out. But yeah, Julia Holter just completely blew my mind this year. Number 3 on the list, getting into the top 3 now. This album was a complete mind blower, but it was one of those slow burners. Those albums that you have to play a few times. In this album's case, in fact, I probably had to hear it 4 or 5, maybe even 6 or 7 times before I finally kind of understood it. And yeah, the album is Childish Gambino and his album Because the Internet, which is a very recent release. It only came out about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Yeah, I think it came out in December. And as I say, it was a very slow burner. It took me time to kind of absorb this. I played it through and gave it a chance. And it is actually accompanied by a screenplay, a kind of script that Childish Gambino wrote and published online. And it's very anonymous. It's very mysterious, the script. But it really helps you to understand, the kind of lyrics and themes of the actual album. So after listening to it through initially, I went back and listened to it as part of this script because he kind of puts the songs into the script so that you can play them while you read. And yeah, just a really interesting idea, kind of putting this screenplay with this album, telling this story of this boy that becomes kind of disillusioned with society and very depressed and starts to try and find kind of refuge and comfort in drugs and alcohol, and discovers that there really isn't a happy ending, and it's very depressing. It's a very depressing listen, but at the same time it's got many kind of layers to it. And after you really sit down and spend time with this project, you really start to understand where Childish Gambino is coming from, and you start to relate to what he's saying as well. So yeah, just a mind blower. But as I say, a slow burner, one you have to sit with for a while, maybe read the script, and it suddenly starts to kind of set in, what you're listening to. So yeah, Childish Gambino, absolutely incredible album with Because the Internet. Definitely go and check it out if you're a hip hop fan. But yeah, that's number 3. Number 2 is an album which I have trouble describing. I don't really know how to describe why I love this so much. I showed the record earlier in the year, and of course this is The Knife and their album Shaking the Habitual. I showed my my vinyl copy earlier in the year. Trifold 3LP set, amazing pressing. I got it for £18. So yeah, if you want to kind of splash out around Christmas, then pick up The Knife's Shaking the Habitual. One of my favourite albums of the year. And as I say, it's very hard for me to describe why I love this so much. It just is so infectious, the beats and the kind of pulsating drums and the kind of Afrobeat influence and the everything on this album is just so hypnotic, and I find myself just becoming entranced by this music. It's so just so infectious, kind of gets into your system, and you can't kind of escape it. It's very encapsulating, I guess. But it's very difficult to describe. I think everybody will have their own opinions on this. Some people won't like it. My good friend Brandon, he openly admits that he doesn't really see what I like about it, I guess, and he's not a fan of long albums either. I think this album was like 2 hours long or something. So if you're not a fan of longer albums, maybe you won't like this as much as I did. But there's just a whole number of reasons why I loved Shaking the Habitual. And yeah, just an incredible, mind-blowing record. So go and check it out if you haven't already. So finally, my number one album of 2013. It was very difficult to pick between this and Shaking the Habitual, but I just couldn't look past this album, and I had to put it at number one. Of course, we have Daft Punk with Random Access Memories, which I showed on vinyl a few months ago, and I raved quite a bit about it in that video, and I was completely blown away by this album this year. A lot of people were kind of turned off by this project because it wasn't really like anything Daft Punk had done before, and hardcore fans, I guess, felt slightly betrayed by Daft Punk for going in a completely different direction and kind of taking a risk, I guess, with their fans. But I have to say that it just completely blew me away. The first listen of this, I remember I played it loud on vinyl, and it blew my mind. I mean, just the kind of ebbs and flows of this record, kind of going from massive high moments to incredibly infectious dance moments to more somber, down to earth, moody moments to emotional crescendos on songs like Touch, which happens to be my favourite song on the album. There were just so many flows, to this record, such a cohesive feel to it, and it just felt like, one of those almost life-changing albums. And I have to say, it has kind of been a life-changing album this year. It kind of helped me through some difficult times, at university and other times where I felt low and kind of anxious or depressed. I put this record on, and it's really kind of helped me get through those times. So yeah, Daft Punk really delivered for me this year. I can't wait to see what they do next, whether they continue on in this kind of dance-orientated mode that they're in at the moment with Random Access Memories, or whether they go back to some of the kind of house-inspired stuff they did in the early days, or, go in a completely new direction. They're such a surprising duo. They seem to just do what they want to do, and obviously they're completely anonymous. So they just really intrigued me, and I really, really loved Random Access Memories, so I had to put it at number one on my list. So yeah, that's my top 10 of 2013. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know this probably wouldn't be the typical list. A lot of people have different opinions to me, and I'm looking forward to seeing other people's top 10 lists, hopefully over the next week or so. I'm really intrigued to see what other people would put as their top 10 or top 20. And I will actually be doing a top 25 list over on my blog. I'm in the process of doing it at the moment. I'm kind of writing a paragraph for each album, counting down from 25 to 1. So yeah, if you want to check that out, I'll hopefully have that done by tomorrow, I'm hoping. So I'll have that on my blog, hopefully by tomorrow. But yeah, that's this video wrapped up, guys. Sorry it's gone on for so long again. Seems to be a habit that I'm getting into, just making these epically long videos. But hopefully you enjoyed it, and leave some comments. Let me know your opinions on the albums that I listed. And hopefully be back soon with some more videos. Until then, thanks for watching, guys, and have a very Merry Christmas.